All right, today we're diving into a pretty wild idea about what makes a country strong. It argues that a nation's real power, its true sovereignty, isn't really about its military or its laws. No, it's something much deeper, something alive. Let's get into it.
So let me just ask you this right off the bat. What's a nation's most powerful weapon? I mean, your mind probably jumps to tanks, right? Or maybe some ironclad treaty or economic power. But what if it's none of those? What if the real answer is a story, or a conversation, or even just a song? That's the big question we're going to unpack today.
And our story really starts with a bit of a puzzle. Picture this. It's the 1970s. Denmark is facing this massive political crisis. And who do they turn to for answers? Not some modern-day strategist, no. They look back to a philosopher who'd been dead for 100 years. How does that happen?
Okay, so the year is 1972. Denmark is thinking about joining what would later become the EU. And a lot of people are nervous, you know? They're worried about being swallowed up by this giant, faceless bureaucracy. Right then, this writer, Ebbe Clovedal-Reich, dusts off the works of a 19th century thinker named N.F.S. Grundtvig. And he doesn't present him as some stuffy historical figure. He brings him back as an ideological weapon for the here and now.
And here's the core idea that Reich blasted back into the conversation, straight from Grundtvig. It's this: real sovereignty, what makes a nation truly independent, isn't about armies or legal papers. It's about the folkeånd, which basically means the spirit of the people. It's this inner strength, this collective sense of self that you can't just assume is there. You have to actively build it.
So, how in the world do you build up this spirit of the people? Well, for Grundtvig, it all came down to a huge battle between two completely opposite forces that are always at play in any society.
On one side, you've got what he called the dead letter. Think of all the rigid, top-down rules, the dense legalese, the academic jargon that's totally disconnected from how people actually live and talk. Its whole purpose is control. But on the other side, you've got the living word. And this is the good stuff. It's the language you grew up speaking. It's the stories you share, the songs you sing, the actual conversations that create a real community. Its goal isn't control, it's empowerment. And Grundtvig believed this fight, well, it was everything.
Now, this wasn't just some high-minded philosophical idea. No way. Grundtvig actually turned this into a concrete plan. He built a whole new kind of school, an institution designed not just to educate people, but to actually defend the nation.
And to really get why he did this, you have to understand what Denmark was up against back then. In the 1800s, the country was getting squeezed by its huge, powerful neighbor, Prussia. And the threat wasn't just about armies crossing a border, it was a cultural invasion. German philosophy, German language, German ideas were starting to overwhelm the Danish sense of identity. They needed a totally new kind of defense.
And that defense was the Danish Folk High School. Seriously, this thing was basically invented as a geopolitical tool. It was like a cultural immune system. So how did it work? Well, first they threw out the elite languages of Latin and German and taught everything in Danish, the mother tongue. Second, instead of teaching Greek and Roman classics, they taught Nordic history and myths, getting students plugged into their own stories. And maybe most importantly, they got rid of rote memorization. Learning was all about free conversation, debate, and singing. It was a school designed from the ground up to build a national sense of self.
And the big idea driving all of this is so powerful. The whole school system was based on this one belief, that a people who genuinely value their own culture, who have a real, deep-seated sense of self-worth, are incredibly tough to conquer. Their cultural self-esteem becomes the strongest, most effective border guard you could ever imagine.
Okay, so right about now you might be thinking, that's a cool story from the 1800s, but does any of this actually matter today? Well, let's jump forward to a much more modern example that's still unfolding: Greenland's journey to self-rule.
Just look at this timeline of Greenland's path. For years, under colonial rule, they were governed by that dead letter, rules made far away in Copenhagen. But the big turning point, the real awakening of their own folkeånd, happened when they fought to make their own language, Kalaallisut, an official language. That cultural win laid the groundwork for huge political wins, like Home Rule in '79, and then full self-rule in 2009. The living word of their own language literally paved the road to sovereignty.
And you can see this spirit in small but really powerful choices. Get this. Greenland's National Day isn't some random date or a king's birthday they inherited. It's the summer solstice, the longest day of the year. It's a choice that makes perfect sense for them, rooted in their own land and their own logic. It might seem small, but it's a profound, sovereign act.
All right,
Let's bring this all home. We've seen the theory, we've seen it in action. Let's really nail down the argument for why the strong sense of self is a nation's ultimate defense.
So how does this strongest border guard actually work? Well, first, it gives a country inner clarity. When people know who they are and what they stand for, they can act fast and decisively in a crisis. Second, it makes them incredibly resilient to propaganda. I mean, if you're grounded in your own stories, it's way harder for someone else's to manipulate you. And finally, it creates true democratic ownership. People start to see the state as theirs, as an expression of their community, not just a bunch of rules handed down from on high.
And there's amazing historical proof for this. Think about it. Denmark's switch to a constitutional democracy back in the 19th century was incredibly peaceful. Why? Because the Constitution wasn't some shocking foreign idea. Thanks to those folk high schools, it felt like the natural next step in the story the Danes were already telling about themselves, a story built on a foundation of cultural self-worth.
So really, what this all boils down to is a pretty radical shift in thinking. Sovereignty isn't just a dusty document you keep in a vault or a line drawn on a map. It's an active, living thing. It's something a community has to speak and sing and argue into existence every single day.
Which kind of leaves us with one last question to chew on. In this super connected, globalized world we all live in, what's the living word for your community? What are the stories, the traditions, the inside jokes, the conversations that define who you are and keep your community unique and sovereign in a world that's always pushing us to be the same? Definitely something to think about. Thanks for tuning in.